Hello StreetSnappers and welcome to a different kind of video, and this one is quite a serious one. With the terrible situation in the Ukraine escalating almost by the hour, you'll have become aware that there are protests happening, rightly so, all around the world. And this means that thousands of amateur photographers are heading out with their cameras to capture some of the action. Now, I've been photographing protests for a long time, and every time I see a protest, here in London at least, there now also almost seem to be as many photographers as there are protesters. So how can you get better pictures than them? Well, there's a right and a wrong way to do this. And in this video, we're going to look at how to shoot protests from the point of view of the ethics, the safety, the gear, the logistics, and what you should shoot. So this isn't strictly street photography. I guess it's more documentary photography and maybe even straying into photojournalism. But I know that protests, marches and demos are usually of some interest to street photographers. And look, I'm not trying to say this is how you must shoot a protest. I'm just going to talk about what works for me and has done for a long time. And I'll give you a few tips that I've picked up along the way. Okay, let's take a look. Protests are happening right now in most major cities and towns around the world. The focus now is currently very much on the Ukraine situation, but there will always be lots of other protests happening. Climate change, for example, and I know that Extinction Rebellion is planning big things for later this year. The first thing we need to look at when we're shooting a protest is ethics. Why are we here? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? We always need to be aware that there's probably a very serious issue at the heart of all this, with serious people trying to make a serious point. It's not a photo shoot, and it's really not an opportunity for every photographer to go glory chasing on Instagram. And let's be honest, it could even be dangerous. So be honest with yourself about your motives. Maybe you have sympathy with the cause and want to support it by publicising it with your photography. Maybe you're working on a project about the issue. Maybe you're just working on your documentary skills and see this as part of a personal project just for you. And yes, okay, maybe you are just there for the fun, and who am I to tell you you shouldn't do it, but just take care. Then there are some other ethical considerations. We should never set up shots. We should be documenting reality, not creating contrived photo opportunities. We should provide honest context. For example, we wouldn't include a picture of somebody getting into an ambulance who's got nothing to do with the protest. They just happen to be nearby. And we shouldn't do any misleading post-production which adds or takes away something or distorts reality in any way. Finally, on this point, there will be photographers who are trying to make a living out of this, so please don't get in the way or ruin their shots. Okay, so what do we actually shoot? We get to the protest, we've got a camera in our hand. What next? Let's be honest, most people just shoot crowd scenes and maybe a few signs, maybe a few police officers, and that's it. And it's not very interesting. There's no real narrative. It's just a random collection of people holding up signs. So to get around this, you need to arrive with a real sense of purpose and a plan. And it goes back to, why are you there? What do you want to achieve? Can you pre-visualize the sort of pictures you're going to go home with? If not, you'll probably end up with some really boring shots, just like everyone else's. And as I said, it's just a random collection of people holding up signs. So all this needs thinking through, and it needs thinking through beforehand. So what would I be looking for from a protest, apart from any plan I might have? Well, first of all, it's important that you stay in the loop with what's happening in the protest, how it's developing, where the hotspots are, where the march is heading, and so on. And I find social media good for this, and that usually means Twitter in my case. The event organisers will probably be tweeting live from the event, and there should be some useful hashtags for you to follow. So try and seek them out on social media, that they will have accounts, and believe me, they will be active. So this means I'll always be ahead of the curve, and I'll be in the right place at the right time. A according to where the action is. As for the pictures I'm aiming to get, I'll almost certainly want some establishing shots. At the very least, we need to establish a sense of place. If we think in a story, we always have the what, why, where, who and how, which is the basis for most stories, the narrative. And this is the where. Try to include recognisable landmarks in some of your shots, maybe even some place names or street names. Another good establishing shot is a crowd scene, and this is sometimes best shot from above if you can get a good vantage point. So you've got your establishing shot to put all this into context. You'll now need some hero shots. These are the headline images which tell the story of the protest in one single image. These are your book cover, your newspaper front page, the splash photo in your feature. They're important, and you'll need several of them. Protests are often highly emotive gatherings, so you'll want a range of shots which are emotionally charged. Think anger, sadness, depression, elation, frustration, happiness. You'll usually find the whole gamut of emotions at a protest. So look for facial expressions, powerful gestures, expressive body language, angry flashpoints. And keep your ears open because you'll often hear emotion before you see it. And I think it was Joel Meyerowitz who said he often hears a picture before he sees it. Well, it's exactly that. At virtually every protest, you'll see lots of signs. Although you should try not to fall into the trap of overly relying on signs to tell your story, they can still be a key part of the narrative. So look for the witty ones, look for contrasts, juxtapositions, reactions to the sign. Watch for connections between words on the sign and the people or activity around it. And this is maybe where you put your street photographer's hat on, back on for a few minutes. Make sure you get some pictures of any key speakers or leaders. These people will probably have some kind of a platform, informal or formal, so get as close to them as you can. And again, you're looking for anger or emotion in their expressions. Don't focus exclusively on the main event. Some of the best opportunities are happening at the margins, in the side streets, round the back. Keep your eyes and your mind open to what's happening off-piste. Look for the symbolic shots, those which can tell the story in maybe a subtle but quite a powerful way. Seek out the characters, the eccentrics, the attention seekers. These people are always around these things, and they make for good material. Then don't forget to capture the aftermath of the protest. Maybe early the following morning. There's often a significant amount of debris left by the protesters, maybe even damage, and the clear up operation can provide some good post-event opportunities that are kind of quite a nice closing point for your story. Finally, think about the narrative arc. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So take plenty of pictures that follow this arc. You start off with some establishing shots, then you build up the story covering all the key points or messages you want to get across. Then relax the tone a little and just come down, and then finish with some closing shots, maybe reflecting on the activities at the end of the day. This helps take the viewer on a structured journey, and it's much more engaging than having this collection of random, unsequenced shots. Let's now look at gear. My first bit of advice is to travel light and don't take anything too expensive. Don't take anything you can't afford to lose, in other words. Having said that, if you have them, it's good to have 2 camera bodies with different lenses. Make sure you have a good range of focal lengths. Primes or zooms are fine. Whatever you've got, whatever works for you. Personally, I like using primes, and I would typically shoot a protest with a 28, a 50 and an 85. Zooms have their advantages because you can adapt quite quickly to changing situations. But generally, I find primes to be lighter, smaller, less obtrusive, and I can get into tight spaces more easily with them. So what else is in my bag? Well, I usually have a small shoulder bag, so I don't want to look too much like a photographer. Something like this one, which is, I think, a think tank retrospective 30. I usually expect the worst kind of weather, so I always have a rain cover for the bag with me just in case. Obviously, make sure you have lots of batteries and memory card capacity. Remember that your batteries will run down their charge quite quickly if it's cold. But just make sure you've got enough of everything to get you through the day. And remember, you'll probably take far more shots than you expect to. So what else is in the bag? I have a chamois leather to, if it's likely to be wet, to get the rain and moisture off my gear. In case I get stranded for a long time, I probably have an energy bar or two and some water. I will have a notebook to help with captioning specific images. And this captioning is quite important, particularly if you want to try and sell your images or do something more serious with them. And I use a notebook rather than my phone for captioning because it's just too easy for somebody to whip your phone out of your hand. If you haven't already got some, it's worth getting some little business cards made. And this little this little piece of paper is great, not only to establish your credentials as a serious photographer, but it also somehow legitimizes what you're doing. As for lighting gear, I don't normally use a flash. I occasionally carry one if I know I'm going to be shooting into the night. But generally, I prefer the reality appeal of ambient light. So it's no flash for me, but that's not to say you shouldn't use one if that's how you like to work. Okay, let's have a look at how we deal with interactions or engagements with the police. And there are usually lots of them around. Whether it looks like it's going to be a potentially troublesome protest or even a passive one, there will be police around. Generally, I find the police keep their distance and let things take their course, and they only really want to get involved when laws are being broken or about to be broken. At least that's how it works, or how it should work in the UK. And I'm aware that things are different throughout the world. The police tend to take either a passive or a more active role depending on where you are, so do be aware of that. But it only takes one small incident for all this to change very quickly. One dissenter, one anarchist, one racist comment, a firework thrown, and there's now a flashpoint and the police are suddenly in there. And when things escalate, police tolerance starts to evaporate and you can expect a tougher response. Certainly in the UK, there is no problem photographing police officers, and they're now pretty well briefed on how they should handle photographers. At least most forces are in the UK. But again, I know it's not necessarily the case in other parts of the world. But do remember, when police start to see trouble starting, they'll want to quash it quickly and minimise the risk of things escalating. Sometimes the police want to lock things down and will force the crowds into a small contained area and keep them there. And this is usually called kettling. Once you're kettled, you've no way out until the police decide it's time to let you out. So if you need the loo, if you have a train to catch, you have a dinner date, then tough. You will be locked down from anything from 10 minutes to several hours, maybe the rest of the day. So do bear this in mind if you're in the thick of the action. Can the police force you to delete images? In the UK, definitely not. And in most circumstances, they have no right to even look at them. But always check out your local laws. Now, if for some reason you find yourself getting arrested, you need to know your rights. And again, those rights will differ according to where you are in the world. Now, in reality, this rarely happens to photographers, but it's important that you're aware of your rights in case the worst happens. And in the UK, for example, there's a bust card you can download from numerous activist websites. There's a website, if it's still around, called I'm a Photographer, Not a Terrorist. They have a good bust card. Extinction Rebellion website has a good bust card I think you could download. And I'm sure similar things exist all around the world. So this leads us on to safety issues. So let's think about safety. And I'll start this segment off by saying that 95% of the time, you'll be in no danger. And if you react reasonably and have a good sense of what's happening around you, you'll be in no danger at all. But some protests do get a bit lively, so we need to consider some worst case scenarios. And in these situations, what you should really be asking yourself is it worth it? I'm not getting paid for this. Is it worth getting myself injured for, or losing my gear for the sake of a few pictures? But okay, even though protests can be dangerous places, I know we're all grown up, we can look after ourselves and all that, but it would be wrong if we didn't talk about safety in this video. So here are a few safety tips you really should be following. First of all, have an exit strategy. Things can get very quickly heated and the tension escalates, and you can easily find yourself with nowhere to go. So always know where your route out is. And this situational awareness really comes in handy when the police start kettling groups of protesters, or you get into the wrong group and you find yourself squeezed into a corner and there's no way out. And when this happens, you want to be out of there fast. So know your exit point is all the time. Always assume the worst and there'll be no public transport. So be prepared to walk lots. Have maps around you as well as info about public transport options. Sometimes if it's a big protest, it'll all be well publicised in advance. Then if you feel your safety is compromised, either stay close to or maybe behind the police, or just get out of the middle of things and move to the edges where it's generally safer and you have an easier chance of exit. Next, blend in. Don't dress or behave like a photographer or look out of place in any way. Just try to look a bit kind of bland and normal. Ideally wear dark clothing. Don't carry anything that looks expensive, like an expensive photographer's bag. Leave your expensive watch at home, any bling. Avoid clothing or behaviour that just might draw attention to yourself. Be hyper aware of your environment at all time. Know who's around you and watch what they're doing. Watch body language. Watch out for people who seem to be looking at your camera. And again, this situational awareness can really save your bacon. Know the geography. Ideally do a recce before the event. Familiarise yourself with routes in and out, escape routes, as I said, and of course, vantage points. As I mentioned earlier, public transport can be a complete nightmare, so be aware of a potentially a long walk to the tube or the train or whatever. Print off a map. Also bear in mind, with a huge influx of people into the area, you could have difficulty getting mobile phone reception. So if you're with other people, make sure you've got an agreed meeting point in case you lose contact with your pals and you can't get in touch. Now, if you're challenged when you're taking somebody's photo, it's up to you how you deal with it. But I find that a response that is simply a smile, say thank you and walk away. Most of the time, this will defuse the situation, and you'll find that a smile usually brings down the temperature a bit. If somebody insists you delete an image, it's probably best to just do it in this situation. It's not worth getting beaten up for or losing your camera for. So the final question on this subject is, what do you do with your images? We've been to a protest, we've come back with a card full of what are reasonably good images, we think. What do we do with them? Well, I guess this comes back to why you're there in the first place. You'll probably already know how you're going to use your images. It could be because you want to help publicise the cause. Maybe you want to do some practice in putting a documentary project together. Maybe you just want to have some fun, who knows. Some people have put together zines or books from their protest experience, like this one by Joanna McIntyre, one of my workshop students, who documented the COP26 protests in her hometown of Glasgow. Maybe you want to sell images to the mainstream media, either newspapers or magazines, or through the agencies or the online picture libraries. And I should say that if this is your aim, don't expect great results unless you have images that are truly unique or groundbreaking. It's highly competitive, and there are loads of people, many of them professionals, trying to do this, and even they struggle to make money. And if you're a regular at protests, you will see the amount of people with cameras. A lot of them are trying to sell their pictures. It's tough. It's a hard sell. But if you don't let me put you off, try it by all means, but you will find it a slog. So there you have it. There's a quick guide to shooting protests, which I just think might come in handy in the coming months. 2022 looks like being the year of the protest, and we just don't know what is going to happen around the world. So be prepared for a lot of action. So shooting protests, well, it can be fun, challenging, exciting, exhilarating, scary, frustrating, all of these things. But I'll say that if you approach it with a plan and a sense of purpose, you will get much more out of the experience. And just remember to take care out there. Protests most of the time are safe places, but they can be dangerous. So it would be remiss of me not to warn you of that. Well, I hope that was helpful and has given you some food for thought. So thanks for tuning in, as always, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Bye for now.